Shall we get started?
Let's do this.
Let's do it. Awesome. Casey, take it away for introduction first.
All right, well, welcome everybody. We appreciate folks who came on back. We know that you've got other options and places to be, including fantastic sessions and, the beach. But we are glad that you chose to join us this afternoon. My name is Casey Pick. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm proud to serve as the Senior Fellow for Advocacy and Government Affairs at the Trevor Project. Short translation of what that really long title means is I'm the person who's a lawyer by background. I've done about 15 years of work in LGBTQ advocacy, frequently with a specialization in talking to conservatives and people of faith. And I actually, fun fact, spent 3 years on the board of directors for the Gay Christian Network, so this is a great chance to come on home.
That's awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Brinson. I use they and them as my pronouns. I serve as the head of advocacy and government affairs for the Trevor Project, which means that my day-to-day is, whether it be Congress, state capitals, or the courtroom, leading LGBTQ youth advocacy projects for the world's largest suicide prevention organization. It's a dream come true. I live in Washington, D.C. Just got married this year, so I live there with my husband, Kevin. I am connected to this work, and especially connected to this conference, as a survivor of conversion therapy, and as a person who, again, attended multiple conferences here, was never on the board, but attended multiple conferences and kind of found a community of people around who understood some of the experiences that I had had, and were also ready to stand beside me in the work to end it. At the same time, I think it should be really, if you haven't figured it out by session E, I'll give this a little nugget to you. This conference can be hard. It can be really an emotional roller coaster of all the feelings. We are so grateful to feel affirmation, and yet remember that we don't always get it. We feel welcome and belonged, and then realize that we may be going back to a place where that welcome and belong doesn't necessarily happen. And there's a lot of really hard conversations that have happened this conference. We're so glad that you came back. This will be one of those hard conversations. I may be cute and bubbly, but we're gonna talk about something that's really depressing, and that's a thing. We have to recognize that, and we have to know that going into this conversation. If at any time during the conversation you're not quite feeling this vibe anymore and you're really missing the beach, totally get that. There's a reason that there's sun and surf out there. I just walked out there in my heels. It'll be beautiful. You'll be fine, okay? But if you do want to stick with us for this conversation, I want you to know about other resources that are also available. So we work for the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project, if I can do two things at once, boom, is the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people. What does that even mean? It means that we are there for LGBTQ youth 24/7, 365, and let's be very clear, they are calling us, texting us, and chatting with us 24/7, 365. It's been an amazing organization for quite a while, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background about it before we moved into the nitty-gritty about what's happening. So we were founded about 20 years ago with the very clear idea of a movie. And that's always nice, Ellen DeGeneres was the intro to the movie. It aired on HBO. It was the 90s, so it was kind of controversial to have LGBTQ youth anywhere out there. And yet, as they were creating and finalizing the movie and about to premiere it, they realized that this young man, named Trevor, in the movie, a fictional character, would have had no one to talk to about this issue. Like, they realized that all of these experiences that this person had, there was no one for them to go to if you were a kid in Kansas watching that movie. And so they literally put a few phones together, put a phone number out there, and started the Trevor Project. And we say the phone lines haven't stopped ringing ever since. It's important that we're there because we know through research that one supportive person can reduce that suicidal ideation by more than 40%. And our goal is to be that person. Now, let's be very clear. To many of you in this room, you've either talked about Trevor, you've called us at Trevor Project, or you are that one supportive person to a person in your life. And we're grateful that you're there too. So again, it's always important to talk a little bit about the services. That's our phone number. I don't remember phone numbers. I literally cannot remember phone numbers. I do not know my husband's phone number. It's true, we're millennials, everything's in our cell phone. So put it in your cell phone if you need to, because then you will actually get to have the Trevor Project phone number that you can always offer to a person who may be in need. Again, 24/7, 365. Now, as I mentioned, a good millennial, I hate talking on the phone. Literally cannot stand it in any way, shape, or form. That's why we have texting. So 24/7, 365, we also just recently were able to expand those services to have it so that if you are anywhere in the country, you can text us, just say the word START to 678-678. Notice I know that number. That is because it's a nice, simple number that, again, thousands of people contact us with. You may not be able to use a cell phone, and it may be more that you want to use a computer. That's why we have chat services. Chat services, trevorproject.org/help. And in a really cool space, Trevor Space is there as our opportunity. Think of it like MySpace or Facebook, but we don't sell your data to the Russians. It is literally an LGBTQ social media space, which you should all recommend to the LGBTQ youth in your life, with hundreds of thousands of LGBT kids just getting to talk to each other. What's it like to come out to my mom? What's it like to go with a same-sex partner to prom? What is it like to find an affirming church? We hear about faith all the time on Trevor Space. So these are some of the opportunities that you could have. And I promise we'll get to the nitty-gritty here soon. We're not just crisis services. So with all of these contacts, if any of you are data nerds in the room, I know some of you are, we are able to anonymize that data and recognize trends. So if we see a lot of people all of a sudden calling in one area, we can recognize that something bad may have happened and we may need to respond. For example, when places like Texas had the bathroom bills, and those bills really started to hurt LGBTQ youth, they called us and we were able to use that data, the numbers of that increase in contacts, as you're doing something that's hurting people. Now, it never shares that information. We never share that information of the person specifically. I want you to know that so you can always tell them. But it's important to have that data, and we are the world's largest, purveyor of that research. We also have a survey that we'll talk a little bit more about in the future. We educate. We make sure that if you have a church, a school, or anywhere across the country, you know what the warning signs of suicide are and how those may specifically come out for LGBTQ youth who are very good at hiding things from people. And last but not least, advocacy. Woohoo! We exist. So we are the Trevor Advocacy Team. Our job is to, as I said, fight for LGBTQ youth across the country and across the globe now on a variety of different issues, specifically one of them, and our main point being ending conversion therapy. So let's get a little bit into that, shall we?
All right. So, Trevor Project, suicide prevention, crisis intervention organization. Why do we invest so much time and energy in the issue of conversion therapy? Well, simply enough, it's because when we are hearing from youth, we are hearing about the issue of conversion therapy, and we hear about it regularly. I've had conversations with our supervisors, and they tell us that the issue of conversion therapy comes up as often as weekly. If you run a search just for keywords on some of those text-based platforms, phrases like pray away the gay, conversion therapy, reparative therapy come up far too frequently. So it is something that we hear about. Going through, we know, and I can tell you a little bit about what we're hearing even. We hear from youth who tell us that they are in conversion therapy, it is not working, and that their feelings of isolation and failure are contributing to suicidal ideation. We hear from youth who are afraid to come out of the closet to their parents because they feel like their parents will compel them to go to conversion therapy. We hear from youth who have friends or loved ones who are undergoing these practices and have been hurt by it. We've even heard from youth who lost somebody to suicide because, or in close proximity to, they're going to conversion therapy. So this is an issue that we are hearing about, and it's a crisis. And we're a crisis intervention organization, and that's why we're stepping in. And it's not just the anecdotal data that we hear, it is also research-based and surveys. Our friends at the Family Acceptance Project came out with a report saying that of youth who had been subjected to conversion therapy, whether it was licensed professionals or religious ministries, they were 8 times as likely to attempt suicide than their LGBTQ peers who had not. So This is an issue that was crying out for us in particular to speak. Though, to be fair, fighting against conversion therapy is a movement that has been ongoing for decades, and we are one of many organizations that has invested time, energy, and resources in this fight. We are proud to stand alongside state equality groups like the National Center for Lesbian Equality, who are legal eagles and champions in the courtroom, folks like the Human Rights Campaign, and of course, survivors and others who stand up independently in their communities to fight this scourge. So that's why we're in this. Now, what is it? What are we up against? Now, if I was talking about conversion therapy, I could stand up here for half an hour and talk to you about every iteration and variation on conversion therapy that I've heard of. And I would still manage to have somebody come up to me at the end of the session and say, I went through conversion therapy and my experience was entirely different. And there's a reason why that is. Mostly because, especially when we're talking about the psychology aspects of it, the licensed professional variant, nobody is teaching conversion therapy. There is no accredited, credentialed way of teaching this. It is ultimately something that people are making up on their own, and you're winding up with tremendous variation on that front. On the other side of things, when we're talking about our religious ministries and our unlicensed spaces, you have the sheer diversity that comes from every denomination you can name has its own variant on how they would do conversion therapy and what that would look like. Catholics are different from Mormons, are different from Baptists, are different from Orthodox Jews. And of course, you even have purely secular variations. And all of it boils down to this idea that a person's sexual orientation or gender identity is something that can change, should change. And that with the application of some practice, whether it be a variant of psychology or intensive prayer, that person's fundamental sense of who they are and how they live that out can change. This is something that, of course, we know there's a long history of it, going back to the 1970s and even far earlier, but that's what oftentimes people think of the 1970s. They think this is an artifact of history. Sadly enough, I know I don't have to go into too much detail in this room about conversion therapy because this room, more than almost any other in the country, knows conversion therapy. You know it, you've gone through it yourselves, you've got family, friends, relatives, or if you talk to enough folks around here fairly quickly, you'll realize that this is something that is real and ongoing. So, getting into it a little bit detailed here, for those who may not be as in the weeds on it, it goes by a lot of different names. It has been known as reparative therapy. It's been known as sexual orientation or gender identity change efforts, or ex-gay ministries. The reason why there are so many names is because every time we call out a name and give it a name and start telling the truth about what it is, the practitioners come up with a rebrand. They rebrand it, they redescribe it, and they try and keep on doing the same thing.
I have to give a really quick example that we literally found about today about this rebrand is that in parts of Asia, they are now called rainbow crossers. So the idea of leaving the rainbow lifestyle is called a rainbow crosser. So what we may call ex-gay or conversion therapy survivors or all this kind of things, they call rainbow crossers. So welcome to, even Casey and I we're finding them every single time we name them. I just had to add that as a little tidbit.
We're teammates up here. This is how this works. Yep. So right, goes by a lot of different names. All of it boils down to any practice or treatment that is intended to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. That can come down to things like, all right, we're going to change your behaviors. So if you are somebody like my dear beloved Sam here who enjoys wearing heels, that would be a no-no. True. If you are somebody more like myself who will not be caught dead in a skirt, they would encourage other such things. Tips on heterosexual dating habits I have seen as a common one, as is, you think it's just from but I'm a cheerleader, but really the getting out and playing football is a thing they try to do. Yep. So that's one form of it. Of course, there are the more infamous and physical variations that we've studied and heard of. Folks will talk about electroshock. They will talk about showing you some kind of stimulus and then having some kind of negative affiliation with that. So you have those physical forms. And sadly, again, those are things that are not completely extinct, though they are more rare and more fringe today. And of course, there is also the variations of talk therapy, which our opposition will frequently try and say, oh, it's just talk. It's okay, they consent to it, they could leave if they want to, you know. Sticks and stones, right? Sticks and stones do hurt. We absolutely know this. And frequently what some of the talk therapies will look like is, let's do an investigation into your life, into your family history, and find anything that we can hang on and say, that's the reason why you became the way you are. And we're going to try and address whatever that is, and then your orientation will magically straighten itself out. This is, of course, also deeply harmful, and it's frequently what we hear about at Trevor, is the shame of, I tried. I have been to therapy, I have been going to the meetings, I have done the workbooks, and it's not working for me. So sticks and stones, yeah, words do hurt. Don't let anyone tell you that talk therapy is not conversion therapy. So,
next.
Yep, next slide. And if you don't want to trust me, trust them. Every major medical and mental health organization in the country, and I could have another couple of slides worth, has come out and condemned conversion therapy as being ineffective, harmful, based on debunked and rejected science. So, and this again, it is based on the idea that what this therapy wants to do is it wants to cram people into certain stereotypes that they just don't fit. And that's not how we understand modern sexuality or gender identity to be. Next. So, obviously, we know it's harmful, we know it's out there. And I fully anticipate when we get to the Q&A, we'll hear more stories about different ways that it's been harmed. But I don't want to stay in the dark place for too long on this. My goal is to have this session actually be optimistic. I want folks to come out of this educated and empowered to try and push back on it. So here's what we're doing about conversion therapy. Starting back in, 2013, 2012?
2012, yep.
2012, we passed the first conversion therapy ban in this country. Note, when I say ban, what I'm talking about are prohibitions of licensed professionals trying to change the sexual orientation or gender identity of a minor. That matters, but that is at least something. I like to think about it as, you know what? Treat it like cigarettes. If I ban it for minors, maybe everybody else gets the idea it's a bad idea. It's at least a starting point. But we successfully passed our first bans in New Jersey and California in 2013, and we have not stopped since. So we are currently all the way up to 18. And do we have the map anytime soon?
The map will be.
The map will be later. The exciting thing about those 18 states is while, yeah, a lot of them are the places you might expect in New England and the West Coast, there are states that you would not expect. You're seeing, we've managed to pass it in New Mexico, in Illinois. And particularly exciting to me is that the people who are supporting ending these practices, it doesn't matter what political party you are.
Correct.
So we're looking at, we got 18 states, 8 of those were signed by Republican governors. And every last one of them, the chamber the chamber vote, whether it was the state house or state senate, was bipartisan. One exception, Hawaii, and that's because that chamber had no Republicans in it. Oops. So that's an exciting thing, because it just means that protecting youth is something that transcends our disagreements, whether they be political or whether they be theological.
Yes.
And that is something that you can feel empowered to take with you. So, beyond those 18 states where we already have legal protections, we've got another 20 states that have introduced this legislation where the conversation is actively happening. And that gets you on up to, that gets you in states in the South, that gets you states all the way across the Mountain West, that is the Midwest. This conversation is happening in a lot of places, and it is tremendously exciting.
Oh.
We've even got federal legislation. I'll go into those real quick. One of them is the Prohibition of Medicaid Funding for Conversion Therapy Act. Go figure, it's a law that actually says what it does. It just means that your taxpayer dollars should not be able to funnel on down to pay for conversion therapy in any sense. The other one is a great bill called the Therapeutic Fraud Prevention Act, which calls conversion therapy what it is, fraud. No matter who's engaging in it, no matter who it's done on. Therapeutic Fraud Prevention Act says that if you are taking money and telling someone you can change who they are, you are engaging in a false business practice. And that is something we can come get you for. For that matter, you can do that anyway in any state that has any kind of fraud legislation existing. It doesn't have to explicitly say conversion therapy is fraud. If somebody has taken money from you and made a false promise, I got friends over in some of our legal organizations who would love to talk to you if you want to get some back. So we've got that going on.
Is that civil or criminal?
Civil penalties on that one. The question was, is it a civil or criminal penalty? for the politics of these things, criminal penalties are not great. So we're looking at that. That said, good question about courts. We've been making a lot of progress and passing a lot of these bills. Of course, our opponents are not taking that lying down.
And they're losing. Sorry.
They're losing. So they keep trying to come into the courts and argue that our laws that prohibit licensed professionals engaging in unethical conduct are violations of the free speech. Nice thing. Courts across the country have shot these arguments down, and they continue to do so. But I am proud to say that the Trevor Project is regularly filing amicus briefs in these cases, raising up the voices and stories of the youth who contact us or the data that we've collected. So we continue to fight these fights, and as we know, the courts are changing, so that fight may get harder, but that's okay, we're getting stronger. And part of that is the way that we are telling our stories and getting information out there. Through bill testimony, every time you have one of these bills go out there, you got to go through the process. Hey, did my mic just go? No. All right. You go through the process, there's a hearing at some point, or maybe people are contacting their lawmakers, so that's one way to tell their story. Others, we are in a tremendous moment with regards to actually raising up and telling the stories in pop culture and reminding folks that conversion therapy is a thing that's out there. Mm-hmm. Some of you may have seen the film Boy Erased, others, The Miseducation of Cameron Post. Lifetime did a great film about Alex Cooper. What was that?
Alex, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So these stories are being told. And so that's an opportunity for my personal favorite way of getting this information out there and making change, which is kitchen table conversations. And really talking to the folks that you're close to and saying, you know, this is a thing that I care about. You might have heard about it. Maybe there's this bill that was just introduced at the Oklahoma State House. I just heard about this, and can you believe this is still going on? Yeah, I can, because I know folks.
That's great. So we talked a little bit about that testimony, those stories, and I think it's important in this context and in a lot of contexts to provide you one of those stories. Now, you're going to hear later on down the line that way more than 700,000 LGBTQ people have gone through conversion therapy. So know that the story I'm about to tell you is one of 700,000, right? There are many, again, we've said this ad nauseum, there's a variety of different experiences because what doesn't work on one person will not work on another, and so we just keep trying to create bad, unworkable they keep trying to create bad, unworkable things on a variety of people. So let's talk about me, shall we? So I wanted to give you an experience of a survivor. I give it in three pictures, but we'll go from there. To start off, if you're a survivor of conversion therapy, I'm going to go into pretty explicit detail of my experiences. So again, if not your time, not your space, totally fine too. So walk out. I was an adorable baby. That is where we start. I was an adorable baby from a loving family who, to be very clear, made sure that I knew I was loved. I come from a Southern Baptist missionary family. If you've ever heard of the mission organization New Tribes Mission, we spread love of God around the world. And I got to experience all that as a child, which is an amazing experience. To be an MK truly is terrifying sometimes, but also pretty awesome at other moments. And while coming back to Florida, my family is united. We're going into this weird American world, together, reintegrating. Lindsay Lohan, very much the Mean Girls moment, right? Except for I was 11, and so it was worse. And all of that comes to fruition where I don't know a lot of the spaces, I don't know a lot of the customs, but a Playboy magazine was found by some of my friends. Now, I'm not going to comment on how a Playboy magazine was found in a mission commune, because that's its own statement, but we found it, we were so excited, and by we, I mean they. I thought I was so holy and righteous that it didn't affect me. I truly thought God had loved me so much that while my friends were sinners, I was safe. And so I immediately went and tattled on my friends to my parents because I was a good little Christian boy, thereby removing the only sex that they were probably going to get for the next decade. And my father, beaming with pride at all the prayer circles, is just so proud of his son for not having this temptation, not putting two and two together. And later on when talking about it, I would ask my we were talking about how that was a sin and why this was a sin, and if I ever had any of those feelings, I should come and talk to my father. And I said, oh, well, I absolutely have had those feelings. And his face shrinks a little bit, like, oh, my son isn't as perfect as I think. And I said, well, I've had those feelings when I think about Dale. And I didn't realize I was coming out. To many people, the idea of coming out is a really scary moment, right? I just didn't realize I was doing it. I literally thought they liked this lovely girl in the bikini. I like Dale. Have you seen Dale's abs? Where is this? I saw the problem, but not why the problem was there, according to my family. My father's face fell. He would become extremely physically abusive, and thought that he could literally scare being gay out of me. This is, again, one of those many forms. The idea being that, you'll be kicked out of the house if you come out. A lot of these experiences are moments of who you are is wrong, and if I can make it so scary to be that, you won't even think about that happening, right? Really bad psychology, but it existed. Then my mom, who I truly think was kind of like the faith center of my family, stepped in and said, he's scared of Dale, right? Like, I had woken up with all these bruises. I'd been, really in a lot of pain. And my mother's trying to stop that pain said, I don't think this is working. He doesn't like Dale, but that didn't actually solve our problem, right? Let's go to this thing called conversion therapy. Now, how she found out about it, I still to this day don't know. I don't have a really great relationship with my mother yet. And so maybe that will happen in the future and I'll be able to ask her where she learned about it. But at that point, literally Googling conversion therapy would have given you almost all results of how to change your kid. I mean, it was we were living in Florida, here in Florida, it was the heydays of Exodus International. It was 1-800-change-your-kid kind of moment. And that was a moment that I had to realize my mother loved me so much that she was trying to do this, and then this leads us into the faith practices of conversion therapy. We walked into their office. I will never forget the office because it was bright and sunny, and there was a lake across from the office. We walked in, and on a glass coffee table were 7 King James Version, of course, Bibles in a stack. And I remember looking up at my mom and being like, oh, he loves Jesus just as much as we do. And I remember, because this is an 11-year-old child who does not realize the trauma they are about to walk into, but instead realizes their mother's love has in fact saved them from physical abuse and had moved them to a place that they understood. I knew about God's love. We talked about it every day in church, right? This was gonna be great. I sat on a conversion therapist's couch and was told, Sam, you're the last one. Every gay child has been found as a child and killed. Now again, many of you in this room need to understand that is obviously horrifically traumatic for a child. That's not true, obviously. But I was an 11-year-old who had lived in countries and in places where the government did come through and kill people. So they were doing what a very common psychological trick in conversion therapy is, which is applying something you trust to something you don't know. And that trust follows. That I knew that the government had killed people. I'd lived in South Africa, if you've ever heard of apartheid. I'd lived in Bolivia, South America, and watched my mother literally shield me while the government shot taxi drivers for being on strike. I knew what that looked like. And my mother, not realizing that she was helping them in that kind of a way, had told them all these experiences thinking maybe that was it. Maybe it was her fault that I had been this way. And they were using that information against her. Now, it wasn't just that. Of course, the common trope many people in conversion therapy have heard, the reason that the government had done this was because gays had AIDS, and they didn't want there to be AIDS any longer in the country. Again, a horrible trope, a non-true space, but something that, as a person who'd lived in an AIDS orphanage and had never seen a white person with AIDS, of course my brain still trusted that moment. Again, I'm giving you these details not to scare you or to make you feel the space. It's to help you understand that this is that kind of trust that so many of these kids are walking into. They're helping this person understand that this is all the world they've ever known, and they're trusting it, and their parents are saying this as an option.
Right. And while this is a particularly extreme case where they utilize something about Sam's unique background, it can be parallel to the situation where they say, oh, your uncle was an alcoholic. Yep. and that's part of what it was. Or your parents got divorced. A lot of it is an investigation of what is this particular individual's story, and let's find what it is in that story that will have an effect. So while that Sam's story is well known for a very good reason and is tremendously powerful for a very good reason, I don't want people leaving the room thinking that if a story is less extreme, that means it is less harmful, or that it is less powerful when we get into the question of how do we fight back and what stories can be told to be valuable.
It's really important, Casey. Thanks for mentioning that. Yes, absolutely. Again, the one of 700,000. This is not going to be typical for everyone, and I think that's really important for us to remember. I do think, and I'm going to move really quickly because it's been a hard day. I'm going to move quickly through physical aversion therapy just so that you understand that it happens, but that it is not, again, it is not a very common experience anymore. That was very much, if you've ever heard, and the easiest way for this to remember is, without going into details, is Pavlov's dogs. If many of you have taken a psychology class, and the idea was that they would ring a bell and feed a dog, and the dog would start to salivate, right? Would start to spit. And all they had to do in the future was just to ring the bell, and the dog would think food was coming, and so they would start to spit. And it was that training that they tried to do to me in conversion therapy. Again, using ice and heat and electricity was just a way of them training you, if you touch a boy, it will hurt. And it worked. With it, again, many of us who come from conversion therapy are extremely having hard times building relationships because I was physically trained to not react positively to a partner. My very first kiss, I puked, which is not a great way to get a second date, by the way. Like really not. That boy did not give me a second date, and that's okay. I use this third picture as this kind of moment of, it still hurts sometimes for me to be in close proximity to other males because my brain tells me that it's wrong, because I was so young. But because of amazing support systems and people around me, I'm able to get past those moments. That's me on my wedding day, with my forehead to my husband's forehead, not in pain. That doesn't always happen. To be very, very clear, you're going to hear more about the statistics. Conversion therapy can lead to really, really hard times on our mental health, and we'll explain that. A little bit of this is, it is not anyone else's right to hear your story. It is your power that you get to share it. You don't owe it to anybody. And that not owing it to anybody is really, really important, I think, for survivors to remember, is that there's going to be a community, and Casey's gonna get into it in a little bit, a community of people around you who can do this work without that pain. Sometimes I cannot share my story. I can today. I just got to go on the beach. I'm next to my friend, right? Like, I'm seeing people that I know in the audience who care about me. Like, this is an easier day. But there are really hard days. We talked about testimony in public media. I was not in any of those movies, but making Nicole Kidman cry was wonderful. But like, that idea of all of this testimony is really, really powerful. I did a New York Times op-ed, and for months after that op-ed, I was emotionally breaking all the time because everyone kept repeating it to me over and over and over again of how important it was that that message had gotten out. But all I kept doing was reliving the same exact moment over and over and over again. So remember that it's not always for your story being for other people. It is your story for you. And I think that's really important as we go into the survivor space.
Absolutely. That said, I'm an advocate. I'm an activist. And so for years, I've been working in various different spaces to find a way to advance legislation that protects LGBTQ people. And for an advocate, go ahead, next slide. We know that part of what makes change happen is the value of stories. I can't tell you the number of times I can walk into a lawmaker's office and I can list out statistics and I can list off evidence. But we know that stories and making it personal is oftentimes what gets it across the finish line. And that's part of what makes it challenging in doing advocacy on the conversion therapy space. Because it is one thing to tell your story in front of a crowd like this, which the audience is largely friendly. It's one thing to tell your story to the press or the media, where, even though there are comment sections only have so much power. Though I keep telling my friend not to read them.
I will learn someday.
it's something else entirely to tell your story to a lawmaker, have them take a vote, and to lose a vote. But the reality of how you move legislation and how you make legal change is that you start somewhere and then you lose until you win. And that's how this has to happen, which means that if we are going to successfully advocate in the conversion therapy space in a way that does not re-traumatize our survivors, that means that there are other stories that we need to tell. Thankfully, there are also other stories that are tremendously powerful, and I bet many of you in this room have some of these same stories. First thing that comes to my mind are the stories of parents. Oftentimes, parents are taking their kids to conversion therapy out of the best of intentions. They think that they are loving their kids. They think that this is the best way to make sure that their kids have a good life. They know the statistics about, depression and negative health effects, and they know statistics about just concerns and discrimination, and they don't want that for their kids. So that's what they think they're doing when they take their kids to conversion therapy. What they often don't know is not only are they harming their kids, they're also actively harming their relationship with their kids. Particularly when you're dealing with a conversion therapist who goes through and says, you know what, this is your father's fault for being too absent. This is your mother's fault for being a professional woman. So oftentimes, when we are looking for whose story it can tell, who can step up and join us in this work, parents are tremendously powerful because they can tell the story of, they put their kid through conversion therapy and they saw the harm that it did, or they miss their kid because they're not there anymore for one reason or another. So parents are tremendously powerful, even parents who didn't actually put their child through conversion therapy, but who thought about it. This is something that oftentimes they can be an easier connection for a leader, or whether it be a lawmaker or a pastor. It might be an easier story to hear or an easier message. There are other folks out there who can be very powerful. Mental health professionals.
Mental health professionals can be really, really powerful because, again, you've heard from your clients the trauma that this has caused, but your literal skill is hearing these really painful things and not letting it change you, right? And so the ability of a mental health professional to say, all of my training told me to affirm and help a person, and all this seems to be doing is hurting them, right? Using those professional statements from the APAs of every APA form, right? Is a really powerful moment. The amount of mental health professionals I watch who can also be there in the room for the survivor or the parents or others who are feeling that pain, and they can be in the room and say, oh, not only am I going to testify, but I'm ready to also help those who this testimony is going to be a really hard day for them. So I really highly recommend having mental health professionals in that room.
Right. One example of this was just earlier this year, I was in Oklahoma, where, yes, Oklahoma did an interim study on prohibiting conversion therapy. So again, don't think this can't happen in your state, that we can't make progress. And for an hour, these lawmakers, both parties, listened to myself and a mental health professional from the state talk about how the harms of conversion therapy, and also she spent a lot of time talking about how, psychologists are regulated all the time.
Yeah.
That ethical business practices and just ethical practices as a professional are something that they're regulated and that the government has a right to do. The opposition tries to say all the time that you can't, limit what can be said between a therapist and their client. Nonsense. So having professionals in there saying, well, yes, we are regulated. Please regulate this. I would like my profession to be trusted. I would like for everybody to walk into a licensed professional's office to know that they are not going to get the quack science of conversion therapy.
And that follows up with teachers. Again, people who are dealing with youth all the time can recognize these harms. So if you are thinking of going into the education field, or people in the education field, those can be really powerful voices to say, again, my industry is licensed and is regulated because we're protecting kids. In order to protect kids, we can't allow conversion therapy. So another space.
Absolutely. Friends or allies, if you know somebody who's undergone this, and then you can have seen that they changed, or that they've had a hard time since. I know Sam's story, and I can speak to the fact that Sam has a rough time sometimes, and that's a powerful story to tell. Nice thing about talking to lawmakers is it's not a court of law. You're not going to get an objection hearsay. You can tell the stories of those you know, and so long as you're telling your truth, that is completely and totally fair. And then I also want to point out that, the reality of conversion therapy, its existence, has a negative effect even on LGBTQ people who never got close to going through it.
Yep.
And this is where even I have my own story to tell, of just being somebody who, well, frankly, I remember being 14, 15 years old, starting to have feelings for girls, being scared out of my mind about it, but so scared I wasn't going to tell anybody. So you can't be sent to conversion therapy if nobody knows. But like any good self-respecting lesbian to be, I tried to DIY it. I went to the internet and said, how do I change this? And found the websites of, I don't know if it was Exodus, it was the early days of AOL. And definitely found a message board full of people who had been to conversion therapy and saw all the theories. I wondered, was it because my parents got divorced? Was it because my mom was trying to go to law school and being very masculine that way? Was it because I was so very into sports? Basketball was
I was not.
Right. So I thought about all these things, and it tied me up inside. I stopped trusting the things that I loved, in addition to just having a hard time liking being around my teammates. I didn't know if I liked it too much. And in that era, it was actually trendy for basketball players to wear a rubber band around your wrist. And if you missed a free throw, snap the rubber band to focus yourself on what you should have done correctly physically. Now, whole different conversation about, athletic training on whether or not that's a smart idea, but it gave me the ability to camouflage it. I wore that rubber band around all the time. I was a jock, nobody doubted it. Anytime I had a gay thought, snap the rubber band. Now, didn't work, but it did hurt. And it did, something even that subtle can have an aversive training effect on you. And to this day, I still have trouble trusting therapists and trusting mental health professionals because I can't tell who the good ones are and who the bad ones are. So that's something that can happen to somebody who never steps into a conversion therapist's office, but who, because this was out there, it was real, it was legal, that affected even me.
So you've heard our stories, you understand how wide and spread this can be. We're going to give you some tools to help stop it. You may not be in the place where you're ready to help stop conversion therapy, but even knowing this information will be really helpful. So the next few spaces are going to help you with those stats. So first off, some numbers. As I mentioned earlier, there are more than 700,000, according to the Williams Institute, based at UCLA, there are more than 700,000 survivors of conversion therapy. They take all of those different, again, many different forms. And we don't have a good estimate of this because, if you haven't guessed, we don't really know that much data about LGBTQ people in general. So knowing about people who were told to erase who they were is even more hard to find that information. But we do know from some of those estimates that more than 20,000 LGBTQ youth are at risk of being put into conversion therapy, again, from the thing that we're trying to limit them from, licensed mental health professionals. And it gets something that's most relevant to QCF, it gets 3 times as worse when you talk about faith advisors. So religious ministries, those who are not licensed but are still praying the gay away, as some may say, those are 57,000 LGBTQ youth at least are at risk of receiving that kind of conversion therapy. We have to be very, very clear. These numbers may not seem like a lot to you, but each of those people are having a significantly hard time, and we have a lot of work left to do. Casey?
Right. So, you may wonder, when I walk into a lawmaker's office, why are they not just saying, this is terrible, let's stop this immediately. This needs to end right now. Very common response is, well, this is from history, this can't still be happening. To respond to part of that question, as part of a much larger survey that I'm proud to say the Trevor Project published earlier this year, we put out the LGBTQ youth mental health survey. We got 34,000 responses to this. So the largest survey ever of this population, and we were asking questions running the full gamut of mental health issues. And among those, we asked the question, have you been through conversion or reparative therapy? And this is a population, current age, between 25 and 13. 5% of that current population of respondents said yes. change the question to, has anybody ever tried to change your sexual orientation or gender identity? And yes becomes 2 out of 3. Now, that ranges from people who went through something like Sam did, but don't have the vocabulary to call it conversion therapy or reparative therapy,
Right.
all the way on over to my grandmother asking if I've found a nice boy yet. So there is that range.
Okay.
But there are some estimates put out there. Our Friends of the Family Acceptance Project will estimate that somewhere around 1 in 3 LGBTQ youth have gone through some kind of conversion therapy. The National Transgender Study that came out recently had data of 13% of transgender folks saying that they had gone through reparative or conversion therapy. So basically, let's say 5% is a floor, and probably is significantly higher. Now, but of that 5%, we later in the survey asked, have you had a suicide attempt in the past 12 months? That 5%, 42% of LGBTQ said yes. When we narrow that down to just our transgender and non-binary youth who had experienced conversion therapy, it rose to 57% with a suicide attempt within the last 12 months. Again, you want to know why Trevor Project's working on this issue?
There we go.
That's why.
Okay, that was a little bit depressing, right? Like 57% of trans and non-binary, again, that's a statistic you need to have in your head of why we're doing this work. 57% of trans and non-binary youth who've gone through conversion therapy have attempted suicide this year. This is not in the past, like this year they've done that. But they are also seeing this map a lot more now. And that's going to help that number go down. This map shows exactly where we're working to end conversion therapy. And thankfully it's updated because it changes every freaking week, it feels like. So this is the most up-to-date map for right now. It will probably change in the future. But the dark orange states are the states where we have stopped conversion therapy. For a licensed mental health professional to practice conversion therapy on a minor is illegal. Awesome. The light orange on this map are states where we have introduced legislation. Now, some of you are like, it's introduction, like that. A lot of bills are introduced. Think if you are a mother. If you are a mother and you see that the state is debating whether this should even be allowed to happen to your child, you may think twice. It would have made my mother think, I don't know if I should Google this, and that Google would have brought up,
Lawmaker X has introduced legislation to prohibit attempts to change someone's sexual orientation for minors.
That made me think you'd think twice. And that is why it is so important that all of these states keep introducing this type of legislation. As Casey mentioned, that's states like Georgia, right? So that is states like Idaho. These are places where the fight is real and we are taking it to them. So how do you get involved in that fight? This is the basics of this space. First off, if there is a piece of legislation already there, awesome. You now have a job to get that bill passed, right? We're gonna get to introduction in a little later space, but let's say that you have a bill, so you're a light orange state. That means that it's time to call your local legislator. We always think about Congress, but let's be very, very clear. State politics is where it's at, my friends. State politics. State politics means that you need to tell your local legislator, one, there's a bill out there. I expect that you will help me save LGBTQ young lives by passing that piece of legislation. So that's one step. Now, I'm a good millennial, again, still hate to talk on the phone, but I may make an exception for this type of work. Call your local legislator. Why? Because the only people calling them are people who don't hate talking on the phone, and those people may not be in support of our work. So let's make sure that we actually call our legislators and get that word out. Put a voice to this issue. Say, I understand that you're in power and you're my elected official. This is important to me. And this is something that, again, as Casey mentioned, has no major political party affiliation. We have Republican governors signing. We have hundreds of Republicans across, in those dark orange states, hundreds of Republicans have voted to end conversion therapy. It is something that is so understandable because we know we don't want to hurt kids. That is something we all agree on, and this hurts kids. We've given you those stats. So, yep.
Yeah, let me step in on this because some of y'all might have noticed that among those dark orange states is one that is usually dark red on most maps I look at. Utah. Now, the thing about Utah is this. That is a conservative-dominated state. But that is also a state where, because of the meetings and the stories and the contacts from their constituents, I mean, I have listened to Governor Herbert talk about how meaningful it was to hear from people in his state who reached out and said, you know what, this has just got to stop. I am as conservative as the day is long. I go to the temple in Utah. That's much more of a Mormon situation. I am there every week, but this, I have seen the harms of it. And lawmaker after lawmaker said, you know what, this had to be a thing. We had to put an end to this.
Yep.
That said, it got complicated. Sometimes politics gets messy, and even when it got complicated, these conservative lawmakers didn't quit. Governor Herbert didn't quit on this one, and took the extreme steps of going through and saying, you know what, fine, we're going to do this through regulation. I'm going to tell the State Board of Psychology that they're going to issue these regulations and prohibit this. So even when obstacles come up, the stories that we tell are powerful enough to overcome even the toughest politics. And that's where you can see that the impossible happens. And because we've seen progress happen in a place like Utah, I can then go into Idaho, I can then go into Oklahoma and say, you know what, this isn't just California and New Jersey anymore. Get on board.
That's exactly it. It's really important for you to remember that whenever you go back to, remember I said that there's some hard conversations that we have here at QCF, that should be your inspiring moment. If Utah can end conversion therapy, QCF is going to be like the perfect, moment for us to start recognizing that every state has the opportunity. Okay, so that's if you want to do some like legislative work. Let's say you don't necessarily, you've done that work, but you're trying to figure out how to share your story more. That moves us into using your voice. Letters to the editor. Yes, people still read newspapers, right? So letters to the editor are really important because they help get out across this, that again, a mother sees, oh, they're debating whether this should even be allowed, and that helps build momentum for this not being an opportunity to hurt kids. Social media. Yes, I'm saying to post. It's totally a thing.
Hashtag 50 bills, 50 states, people.
Woot woot. Hashtag 50 bills, 50 states is our campaign slogan on this work. It's important because it says every state matters. That's because you see there are 39 now. There were not when we started this work. We were concentrating on easier states where we would do good work. It's important that we hit all 50. Every state matters. The kid in Kansas matters just as much as the kid in California. And if we remember that, we'll be fine. Social media, post about it. You don't have to be an expert. That's the power of hashtags, people. You don't have to be an expert. You have to enter into the conversation, and people following that hashtag will learn all about these types of issues. Last but not least, as Casey mentioned earlier, kitchen table conversations. We just got after the holidays. Some of you may have gone home, some may have not. Guess what? It's always totally cool to maybe write back to that friend who you saw over the holidays and remind them that conversion therapy is still a thing. Yes, that may not be the greatest way to open the conversation, but at least, it was great just to eat your pie, Aunt Susan. Also, conversion therapy is real. So, that is a good way to, again, for me, remember that these conversations have to start local. This is not just us in front of Congress, right? This is you at the kitchen table mattering just as much. I give it that comedic flavor, so hopefully you will remember to tell Aunt Sandy that conversion therapy is still real.
Right, and y'all are going to have an opportunity as soon as you go home because folks are going to say, so what'd you do in Fort Lauderdale?
Yes, it's true. Awesome.
Learn about a lot of really cool things, but also learn that this is still out there and still a concern. That said, I am not sending anybody home without homework. True. So we've got a little bit of a question of what do you do if there's a bill in your state? And what do you do if, one, push that your legislator if you can, and have the conversation. Make sure that this isn't something that can go away when, Boy Erased is just being streamed on Netflix and nobody else watches it. I love them. It will come.
True, it's true.
But there's also the reality, and I know a lot of you are probably somewhat frustrated that we've been focusing so much on what the laws can do.
Yep.
Of licensed professionals, minors, when we know a lot of conversion therapy is still happening through these unlicensed religious ministries, and when we know a lot of conversion therapy happens to adults, and frankly, 18 is real young for a cutoff. So, what does that mean, and what is the role of faith communities? Faith communities are huge, and this applies if you're in California, If you're in New Jersey, if you're in one of our dark orange states, you still have work to do here. Because the faith communities are the ones where often that's where a lot of conversion therapy happens, and it's where a lot of the generator is. It's where a lot of the demand comes from. It's also, I like to point out that the faith communities are the ones that are being preyed upon by conversion therapists. I think faith communities in this country are being exploited and are being just fleeced, sheep being fleeced. And I think that that's why it's important for us to push back. So what can we do? Part of it is simply knowing that it's real and knowing the harms. You all have come here, you've educated yourselves. You know what the professional statements are. Those professional statements apply to religious or to psychologists. Doesn't matter. The harm is real. You've heard that conversion therapy is causing youth to call a crisis hotline. That should be reason enough to be able to go to it and say to your church, hey, have we ever been affiliated with one of these people? Or maybe you're at one of those churches where the description is not affirming yet. And let's just say, let's look at your ministries. Let's look at what are you putting energy into. Is that ministry on sexual brokenness, is that really focused on helping people deal with actual challenges and addictions or, challenges with pornography? Or does the person who's teaching that, are they also pushing a form of change? Yeah. Check on that. These are people who are being paid with your tithes. You have every right to ask. And it is something that I have found is absolutely consistent. You don't need to change your theology about marriage to believe that conversion therapy is deadly. So you can go through it and just, if that is something that's happening in your church or a church in your community, check. I know it can take a lot of courage to ask your leaders what they're doing and to try and get into that space, but I think it matters. Other things that faith communities can do. So often, even in the bills that we're pushing that actually don't limit religious practices at all, it is religious communities that are coming out hardest against our legislation. So we need counter voices. It needs to be something that, if the Methodist Church in your state, if your UCC denomination in your particular region is willing to put out a statement saying conversion therapy is harmful, God loves LGBT people exactly as they are, and we don't want to see them changed through any attempt through prayer or whatever, that's a powerful statement. And that's something that matters in California, New York, New Jersey. And so that is something that we can go through, and just like I want to someday have a slide with a list as long as those mental health providers of religious denominations, megachurches, etc., that have come out saying that conversion therapy is not what God wants.
Amen. Love it.
And that's
Preach.
the thing.
Sorry.
Yeah. And that's the thing y'all can do, and I can't.
It's true.
So there are so many ways, and what I'm really asking for here in this particular community is that we get creative thinking about what stories we have to tell and who we have to tell them to, so that it doesn't just become somebody like Sam, a survivor, telling their story over and over and over again to lawmakers in one space. Y'all have audiences that we can't reach. You have stories that we can't tell because they're yours.
It's great. It's great. And that leads us pretty well. Oh, actually, I think. Yeah, we're there. Yep.
Did we get through it?
Yep.
All right. Well, my last part of this and why I think faith communities are important is, and I say this as a person of faith myself, I spent my hour out on the beach. I went into the water and remembered what it felt like to be baptized on the waters off Catalina Island and feeling what that felt like. And the thing about being at GCN is you hear the stories of faith and you remind yourselves of all of that. But the thing that makes me most desperate to have faith people in this conversation is not because it's in some way our fault that conversion therapy is a thing, but because people of faith, especially Christians, know what it is to plant seeds and wait for a harvest to come. Especially my evangelical brothers, sisters, and siblings. We know that you have to plant the seed and you have to wait for the good harvest to come. And you know that there's never a harvest if you don't plant that seed. So y'all are my folks who can go out there, who can tell these stories and know that maybe we don't win today, maybe we don't win tomorrow, but that harvest is going to come. So help me plant some seeds. Let's go get Texas.
Amen. Okay, it's homework time. I didn't tell you, I studied nuclear engineering at MIT is my And LGBT politics is way more complex than nuclear physics, by the way, by far. But in MIT, we had a lot of homework. Shocking, no one. And here's your homework that I need each and every one of you to do. It is super simple. I need you to text the word Trevor to the number 40649. This will charge you no money other than standard messaging rates apply. But other than that rate, this will help you join the world's largest campaign working to end conversion therapy. You all want to be part of that. You all want to do that. It's really simple. Again, not a long phone number. 40649 and texting Trevor, Trevor, to the number 40649. We're going to be here for questions. We are ready to answer your questions. I gave you that hashtag below so you can social media talk about this. You are more than welcome to. I really appreciate you spending this time with us. You could have been on the beach, right? You could have gotten that extra fun in the sun, but you spent it with us, and you're going to help save lives. It's amazing to get to work with the Trevor Project, and I'm super excited to get to work with each and every one of you. It has been such a good conference for the two of us to be back and seeing the great work. Let's keep the great work up. Okay, we thank you for your time. Any of your questions? Whew. 5:05. Great, you're on time.
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, I was expecting quite a question, but I probably won't.
Sure.
So I wanted to share, but I wanted to share that they're talking about
The one not wearing heels.
Yeah, I was.
Thank you. That's
The one not wearing heels.
Thank you. Yes. I just wanted to share that for some of us, it can actually be, for me personally, I'll just speak for me personally, it's still too difficult for me to tell my story explicitly. I have a theater background, I'm an actor, and recently I wrote a play with a character with different names and different situations, but it was my story. Emily Dickinson said, "Tell all the truth and tell it all slant." And I think it's okay to give yourself permission to tell your story in a way that is safe for you, and it was still impactful. You know, I thought, well, if I present a play in front of a bunch of liberal theater people, I'll just be preaching to the choir. But the interesting thing was none of them knew that this still happened, you know? And in a way, it was the best audience, because those are people who you don't have to tell them that this is wrong, you just need to tell them that it exists. And so anyway, I guess what the point I was saying is don't be afraid to tell your story in a way that's still safe for you. And if you're an artist and you want to use a fictive name or situation or any other way, that's acceptable too. But thank you.
That's huge. It's a really important message to get across that, again, we take so many different forms. There have been these many movies that have taken these stories and raised them up, but that means a lot of people are asking about it, not realizing it still happened. A lot of my friends, when I started working on this, said the 1980s called, they want their issue back. And I reminded them that I work in nuclear weapon disarmament. And the 1980s called and they still have their issue. We may not talk about nuclear weapons, they still exist, right? Like, we may not talk about conversion therapy, it still exists. So I think it's really important to recognize that that is what you're probably going to hear as a response, is that people may not realize that it's still happening. So be ready for that.
Absolutely. I started my career in LGBT advocacy working on Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. And a lot of people were telling me, aren't there more important issues? The percentage of LGBT people who are in the military is so very small, who cares? They didn't say that in public, but it was something I heard often enough. This issue kind of suffers from the same thing. I mean, especially here at QCF, I can be real with y'all. We know that we live at an intersection that a lot of folks sometimes still are like, wait, there are gay Christians? So when you're starting behind that particular 8-ball, same thing. But you know what? It matters. It matters not just because of the 700,000 people who've gone through it, not because of the 20,000 kids that we want to protect before they turn 18, but it also just does affect every LGBT person out there who lives in a society that still says, maybe we ought to be changing y'all.
Hi, I'm Nate, he, him, his. So my father didn't practice conversion therapy on me, but is a minister who still does practice conversion therapy. And my question for you is, have you had any success directly engaging with practitioners of this? And has that been any part of your strategy or communications and messaging?
Sure.
Thanks.
I'm going to let Casey start that answer.
Sure, I'll try and run myself back up to where the cameras can see me because, hey, all who are watching this being streamed. So, current practitioners, that's a tough nut to crack. And spending time talking to them, most often, I'll be real with you, we see them most often when we are at crossroads in hearings with testimony. So we tell our stories, they tell theirs, and then the lawmakers vote. That said, I have had a lot of direct experience talking to people representing very conservative denominations, faiths, pastors, who have not told me specifically that they're practicing, but I'm pretty sure they do. And it's about having that conversation, and especially at Trevor, we have the ability to say, conversion therapy is harmful, and we've got the receipts. So I know that even in these tremendously conservative spaces, tremendously conservative people, I know you've been planting seeds for a long time, my friend, with your dad. Maybe we'll see a harvest there soon or not, but you do what you can.
I think Casey's point about harm is important. It's also one, the faith community is really starting to recognize its role in response to suicide, right? Like there's a lot of pastors who are starting to have to come to grips with not causing suicide in that kind of spaces, but like the idea that as a faith community, when a suicide happens, it is a lot of faith community that steps up and tries to take care of the survivors. And so I think for me, I've been able to help make some of those inroads via the suicide conversation. That harming kids, in very honest, in some faith practices, is just, turning them into better Christians, right? Like it's okay to have a little harm if it hurts them, but the suicide, no one in our faith communities even remotely could think that could be a good space. And so using that may be a good angle. All those stats we gave, maybe that will help as well. Yeah.
That said, as always, and we probably should have led with this,
Sure.
We do always remember that suicide is multifactorial.
Yes.
No one thing causes a suicide. There are so many factors that weigh into it. What we can say is that we have evidence showing correlation. What we can say is that we hear the stories of youth who've gone through this and that it stresses them out and they call a suicide hotline. So, but it is something to always be responsible when talking about with these things. Also, very important to be responsible when, we're sharing the stories of somebody who we lost. At Trevor, we actually have media guides on how to responsibly report on conversion therapy, also how to responsibly report on suicides, because suicide contagion is a real thing. So this is something where I'm saying, arm yourself with the facts and the stories and the studies that we have given to you, but, use them carefully and use them wisely.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I had a question about how do y'all engage with so-called success stories of conversion therapy, particularly like interpersonally and in the opposition you might face like in a courtroom? I had a friend who would consider herself a success story of something she wouldn't call a conversion therapy, but just wonder how to engage with that.
It's a great question, Rachel. Thank you for that. So as you can probably imagine, as a person who shares my story a lot, I have a lot of ex-gay friends. Is an interesting word for it, but I would call them friends. Many even on my social media, right? Like they interact with me consistently. I am a thorn in their side, but they understand that our experiences are different. I think the first thing to remember whenever interacting with a person who may be what you're calling a success story, an ex-gay, a rainbow crosser, as we learned, right? Like these ideas, these people who are saying that they are no longer LGBTQ or not practicing in the same way, right? Is to remember grace. These are individuals who I have to start with have literally been now rejected by every type of identity that they've had. They were they came out as an LGBTQ person. Their religious community rejected them. They then moved into a religious space where they may have experienced conversion therapy and said, I went through this, it fixed me. And now the faith community may support them a little bit, but they still have the shame, right, of they were LGBTQ to begin with, right? And I think for a lot of my ex-gay friends, that is the hard part of their success story, is that their success story comes from a place of pain that they are not able to process with anyone, really. No one wants to kind of hear that story. So although I may not agree with them, I think the very first thing that I would say is remember to come into this from grace, because this is a person who has had mental health professionals or faith advisors or someone lie to them get them to believe a lie, and then that lie has now been integrated into their life as the only way that they can happily keep living in this world. So that's a really hard space to live in, and we need to give them as much grace as possible. It is also going to become very popular, right? Like this, we have 2 individuals after the Pulse events who have said that they went through conversion therapy. And so it, again, is this moment of grace of, I want to give you the space to live your life in your truth. I'm going to still do everything I can to make sure that youth do not have access to what I see as harmful. That is an easy way to respond to that.
Right. It's one of those things where, particularly if I'm talking to an individual directly, there's no need for me to challenge their story. Their story is their story. And I just see them as somebody who is trying to do the best they can with what they know. That said, particularly if I'm engaging in advocacy, if I'm talking to a lawmaker who tells me, but my cousin, Jimmy, he went through it and he's fine, I then can raise up the fact that time and time and time again, not just people who went through conversion therapy, but people who ran conversion therapy organizations have turned around and said, you know what, we weren't really changed. It didn't really work. We're doing the best we could, but it wasn't real. And so I'm able to point out other evidence. And also, again, just go back to, you know what, so what if it works? It works for this one individual you know. We still have all of this evidence of the harm. And it's one of those spaces where there's an advantage to working on saying, we're going to protect minors, who we have so much data that minors are particularly vulnerable to harm at this, that you can't do this to kids. It's true. And then we emphasize that, and we continue to say, you really shouldn't do it to anybody.
Any last, we have a couple more questions. Great.
Yeah, when I go to run.
Thank you, Casey. I could try to sprint in heels.
No.
Thank you. My name's Albert. I just go by Albert. I don't know if you're familiar with the term Florentine homosexuality. Have you ever heard that term? Okay. For anybody in the audience who doesn't know, Florentine homosexuality is really where homophobia starts in Western European culture. It comes from kind of like a late medieval, early Renaissansic time or mid-Renaissansic time. I don't know the era exactly. We're talking like 1500s. But in Florence, Italy, it was a very openly gay city. It was like kind of the San Francisco of Europe, pardon my parlance. But it was not just an openly gay society. There were also like age-structured relationships, and there was just as much debauchery as there was openness. And this caused a lot of sort of hatred to start happening in throughout Europe. And when there was no word for homosexuality or was no word to identify gay people, you had people from other countries referring to homosexuality as the Italian vice. And then the Italians would call it the French disease and stuff like that. So really, homophobia is like the bastard grandchild of xenophobia. It really started as the othering of the foreigner. And if you've never heard of this, I encourage you to look that up, because the idea that homophobia starts in religious practices, that it's tied to faith, that it's ubiquitous with Christianity is harmful. It's very, very harmful. And I love what QCF is doing, because you're breaking that stereotype that in order to be a Christian, you have to identify as non-affirming, when in actuality, homophobia is just hating the foreign other. That's really all it is. But you already know about that.
That's helpful. Casey, why don't we take the other 2 questions, because we are almost out of time, and then we'll answer it all at the end. Yep.
Sure. I've also long thought that homophobia was the grandchild of misogyny, so it's kind of nice to know who the other dance partner was.
Yay! Yay! Everything is awful.
Hopefully not. I'm Cortland, he, him, his pronouns. So as you think about, how we go out of this room and go into our communities, I was looking on the website and just some resources that you have available. Are there any places where you think that we can get resources if we want to go back and talk to peers or talk to workplaces, or just share the message of, conversion therapy and that it is existing, and without putting the burden on hey, somebody in our group or somebody in our friend group, please raise your hand and say that you went through conversion therapy so that we can have you on a stage and telling your story and re-traumatizing you. Like, is there a way that we can share this message that's not just with politicians, but also in communities so that they understand this is happening?
That's great. And if you want to send it down to Kenneth. Yep.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kenneth, he, him, his pronouns. I'll actually be I'm a mental health professional. I'll be sitting out at the mental health table right outside afterwards if you feel triggered and want to talk to somebody. But also, I've noticed that a lot of denominations have moved towards endorsing celibacy instead of ex-gay therapy, and I'm wondering how you're addressing that and whether it's more or less harmful.
That's great. Thanks, Kenneth. Okay, so we had xenophobia. Yeah, I know. We had xenophobia. We had how to share with our peers, and celibacy. So a little bit about the othering space. I think that also comes into what the movement is doing as well. So I guess welcome to being a gay Christian, right? Like LGBT people don't like us because we're Christian, and Christian people don't like us because we're LGBT. It's like the worst Venn diagram known to mankind. And I like to think of it as that's what makes us really, really good advocates. The othering has actually made us a space of we are bridge builders. We understand what it is like to be othered by at least someone, and sometimes by many. And so we are really good at making those conversations. I'll make a really quick joke in that sense of that's actually, I think, what made me a really good nuclear engineer. Because everyone has an idea of what nuclear stuff is, right? It's green goo, it's like nuclear weapons. And I had to kind of recognize that othering, I was able to respond to it really well because I'd already been doing it my entire life growing up, coming out. Like, I knew you were gonna think that I was either, someone from Glee or on a pride parade. Like, that's what you were going to think. And so that othering space is something that I think we can all lean into is, yes, we've been othered. Let's use that as the bridges of tomorrow.
Great. Cortland, your question about, so what resources can we use and how can we tell these stories without having to go grab somebody to tell every Tom, Dick, and Annie what their story is, one-on-one? Thank God for videos. We've got resources. Sam has actually told their story on video. You can find it at the Trevor Project website. You can find it through our YouTube. So you've got things like that. You have many stories. Also, we're in the unchanged track of the Q Christian Fellowship Conference. This track exists because people at QCF chose to step up and tell their stories and their experiences. So look into those stories, and that's a resource as well. So you're surrounded by, it's already been written down, we don't need to be reinventing wheels.
Great. And easiest other space on that, Cortland, will be social media. Again, so many of these things have been done through social media, and creating a space where you don't have to be, I think that's exactly the hard part, is that we keep trying to recreate stories when that's the whole power of history, is that we can rely on experiences and not have to relive them on our own moment. I'm not gonna just totally, but Miseducation of Cameron Post and Boy Erased are really helpful too, because they're ways that you can just have your own movie night. You should not have that movie without warning people what's in the movie, because if you're a survivor, that's really a hard movie to watch, right? But for your you could just say that, and that would help hint people, oh, there may be actually conversion therapy survivors in this room. We don't know who it is because he warned everyone, just like we do for pronouns, just like we do for all these other spaces. So hopefully that helps too.
Right, and there are actually, again, we're in this moment of this is a discussion. There will be some great documentaries coming out in the near future. So those documentaries exist as well. So keep an eye out for it. And for your question with regards to churches that are, changing how they're framing this to say, instead of changing your sexual orientation so that you say I'm a straight person, just saying that I am a gay person who is celibate. I want to be respectful of the Side B folks who are in this room, for whom that is their identity, is that they owned their identity as LGBT, but also have a commitment because of their theology. And for folks who that's what they've come to on their own conclusion, I honor that. That said, for a church that says this is the only way you can be, it falls, to my mind, in a very similar space of you're trying to cram folks into, you're trying to make somebody into something they're not. You're trying to force people to an end result that you choose and not them. And that is just as harmful. It is not the same thing as conversion therapy, we have to be precise in what we're talking about here. I'm a lawyer, it's kind of the disease. But it is still, anytime you're telling somebody that you don't accept their sexual orientation or gender identity or who God made them to be, there's harm there. So I say again, respond with grace. Let people own their own story, but they don't get to own all the facts. And what we have is the evidence and the facts and the science that we've shared with you today.
I love that. Okay, you made it. We made it through ending conversion therapy. We're probably going to pass a few more bills before the next time we see each other in New Mexico. Please, fingers crossed. And I can't wait to celebrate with you there as we have done this work together. So thank you for your time. We're going to be here for if you have any further questions. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.